A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining the talk between Claudia Schadeberg and myself about the wonderful and amazing life and work of Jürgen Schadeberg. I am Karin Rehn-Kaufmann. I'm trying to lead the 25 Leica galleries around the world. I think it works quite well. I also have the lead of the Leica Oscar Barnack Award, one of the oldest and very well-known photo award. And to make a long story short, one can also say I'm the interior and foreign culture manager and minister for Leica. So I also would a very warm welcome to you, dear Claudia. Perhaps you can also introduce yourself with a few sentences.
Yes, well, I lived and worked and was married to Jürgen for about 40 years. And sadly, he passed away last August. But my role, as it's been for the last 40 years or so, has been to work with him on his photo archive of 70 years of work. We made films together, we made books together, and we made photo projects together. My background is not in photography, but I studied history of art, but then I went into television, mainly research, investigative journalism. And then when we met up, we first of all made films together.
Good, thanks a lot. So one reason why we have this talk here is because at the moment we have a wonderful exhibition. It's called The Compassionate Eye in our Leica gallery in Madrid of Jürgen's work. And so perhaps we can start with Berlin. Jürgen was born in 1930 in Berlin. And I have to say the last time I met him was when he got the Leica Hall of Fame. That was in 2018, in 2018 in Wetzlar. And I remember quite well, we had a long talk together and we had a lot of fun, but it was also deepness in our talk. And I have a small picture behind of me, and there is Jürgen laughing like a little boy. I mean, he had really a special sense of humor. And in a way, I have to say, I stay in front of these really colorful, intense, dynamic, rich, and most of all, courageous life with awe and admiration. He was really a very special, not only photographer, but also a very special person. So, born in 1931, we know what happened after 33. So perhaps we can start with one icon from Jürgen. The picture was shot in Hamburg, I think in 1948, the one-hand handstand. And if you look at the picture, I have it here, one really asks oneself what was going on there? How could this picture happen? Perhaps you can tell us a little the story behind this very special image.
By the way, just to put you in the picture, he took his first picture actually in 1942 in an air raid shelter in Berlin, where his mother was and where he used to go. And so he was 11. So that's his first picture. In 48, he took this friend of his doing a handstand on the Hamburg Michel. Basically, he was a friend of his. He was an acrobat. And Jürgen had, this acrobat had done a favor for him in that Jürgen had photographed him in the nightclub that he was playing in Hamburg. And there was a bit of a problem because when he took the picture, he had a flash which had sort of powder, what do you call it, explosives for the flash. It was very old fashioned. And he did that. And when it went off, all the people on the terraces upstairs on the balconies, they all got black faces, and it all went terribly wrong, and he had to leave the nightclub. But anyway, he did try and do some publicity pictures for this fellow. Now, this fellow said he would do him a favor of doing this amazing act on the Hamburger Michel. And it was just turned out to be an incredible picture, and he was an incredible acrobat.
Yeah, and I mean, Jürgen was 17 when he took the picture, because I mean he left Germany. He left Germany in 1950, right?
Yes, he left in 1950. And this was taken in 48, so he was, yes, quite young.
Yeah, he was 17. And when he left...
Yes, he was quite young.
Yeah, really. And when he left to South Africa in 1940, so, I mean, he was 19 years old. And
1950, yeah.
1950, yes. And as far as I know, his mother was already, and his father, his stepfather, they lived already in South Africa. And in a way, he was glad to leave Germany with all what happened with the regime with Hitler. But on the other hand, I think he was not aware what was going on in South Africa with the apartheid politics. So
no, I think it was a shock for him.
Right, and perhaps
no, it was a bit of a shock because I mean, sorry.
Yeah, perhaps you can tell us a little bit the first steps of Jürgen in South Africa, in Joburg, and perhaps also the really very interesting work of Jürgen with the Drum magazine. And also, of course, all his experience in Sophiatown with the jazz clubs and so on. So, because I think this was really a very, very special and also hard time for Jürgen.
Well, he thought he was escaping from a very bad situation in Berlin to a much better one. But to his shock and horror, he found this institutionalized racism in South Africa. And he couldn't quite believe it. But in the end, he got various jobs, including working on a magazine called Drum, which was aimed at Black readers. It was like a little island in Johannesburg because it was the only place where blacks and whites worked together because there was a complete separation normally.
But Claudia, sorry to interrupt you, but Claudia, the Drum magazine, as far as I know, was the first magazine for Black people in these times.
It was almost the first. There was another small one called Zonk, but it had a very small readership. But this was one of the first, and it carried out a combination of investigative stories, sort of political, but they tried not to be over political, otherwise they'd be closed down, and more light stories like 50s glamour pictures, which he didn't really like to do, but he was asked to do them. He was not only photographer, he was picture editor, layout person, liaising with the printer, and training the next generation of photographers.
I mean, this was the first training for Black photographers in any case, because there were not existing Black photographers. And do you know the story how he got in the work, being able to work for the Drum magazine?
Well, because he just heard about it. Yes, no, he heard about it and everybody said, don't do it. It's too difficult. You'll only be with blacks and the pay is not very good. So he thought that sounds just what I'm looking for. And so he thought it'd be very interesting. He'd already sounded out the white world. He found it rather boring. And so he found the black world much more interesting on all levels, particularly the jazz scene. He documented the jazz scene quite extensively. And he documented all sorts of things. I mean, he was, the investigative stories were interesting, like the treatment of farm workers. And he pretended to be an engineer on the farm while the black journalist was with him. And he sort of impersonated somebody else just to get there because they wouldn't want him to be anywhere near there taking photos. In another story, he hid his camera in a loaf of bread when he was doing undercover work for a church story, when they deliberately put a black person in a white church. So that was all very interesting. And he got involved in the political scene, and also then he met Mandela the first time. That was in 1951 in the ANC meeting.
Perhaps before we come to Mandela, one question. Do you know if Jürgen's pictures were only published in the drum, in the more black area, or the pictures were also published in white newspapers or magazine in Joburg?
Definitely only in drum. The white newspapers were in a totally different world as far as I can gather. It was a completely separate world. You had separate entrances for blacks and whites, and the two just didn't meet. So the drum office was like an island. It was the only place where the blacks and whites mixed, and the stories were all about black people, and the people weren't interested in black people, the white people.
Yeah, this was really the apartheid system. Yes. I mean, one of the reasons why Jürgen is so well known all over the world and famous is, of course, the different portraits which he took from Nelson Mandela. And when we are talking now of this Mandela's trial, that was shot, as far as I know, in 1958. So was that the first time when Jürgen met Nelson Mandela?
No, he first met him in 1951 when he shot him at the ANC Bloemfontein conference when Mandela was actually a youth leader. Then he photographed him in 1952 at the Defiance Campaign. It was a very important movement to defy the unjust laws. And then in 1958, that one is quite well known. He's smiling coming out of the court. It was a treason trial when he was released, and so he was sort of quite a happy picture there. But he was rearrested not long after, and spent many years in prison.
Claudia, you met also Nelson Mandela later when you went back with Jürgen to South Africa. What was your impression, and what was Jürgen's impression from this? Really, for me, it's a hero, Nelson Mandela. What was the impression from this man? Because I don't know if one can say Jürgen had a friendship with him, but he really met him quite often, and later on you as well.
Yes. Well, we both met him. I know that Jürgen in the 1950s socialized. I wasn't around there. I only met Jürgen in the 1970s in London. But Jürgen met Mandela socially in various social situations with his friends and all that. But we met him together in 1990. It was quite a memorable event because it was New Year's Eve. He'd just been released from prison and we were at his Soweto home. And we were actually sitting right opposite him and Winnie Mandela and toasted them the new year in. It was a very interesting, it was an amazing experience. Unfortunately, Jürgen didn't have his camera, but it was very interesting because we got there a bit early, and it was in his Soweto house. And there were a lot of former Robben Islanders there. And, you know, you'd think, oh dear, this is going to be a serious event. But they were so funny. They were all making jokes. And it was a real pleasure. They were chatting away, all of them. And it was very interesting. Now, Jürgen did some voluntary work for the Children's Fund, the Mandela Children's Fund, so he regularly met with Mandela. But then also we were invited for lunch one day, and that was interesting. And when we came in, he said, "What on earth do you want to come and see an old man for? I'm sure you've got other things to do." So, and then he often said to Jürgen, "Haven't you retired yet?" Of course, you know, Mandela was not that young. Mandela was an incredibly magnetic personality. His presence was quite, you know, strong. Yeah. And he had a wonderful sense of humor.
Okay. So they totally fit together very well, because also Jürgen had a very special sense of humor. I mean, in 1959, Jürgen had to quit his work at the Dram magazine because of political reasons. And also later on in 64, I think, he left South Africa also because of political reasons and came then to London. What was waiting for him in London? You, perhaps? because you just mentioned that you met in London or in England.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know where and when you met. Perhaps you can tell us where you met Jürgen for the first time.
Well, we met in London. We had a mutual friend, and I was with this mutual friend in his garden in London. And then somebody climbed over the wall. It was on a weekend, and this person happened to be Jürgen. Climbed over the garden wall. And I think that was my first encounter with him, which is quite funny. We met subsequently several times and eventually got together. And then we got married in France, actually, in 86. In 84, rather, 84. So I didn't know anything about photography, but I soon got interested in it because we lived in a place where he had his darkroom there, and I saw him printing a lot and all that. So I got slowly involved in the photo world. And in England, he did a lot of social issue photography, social justice, social issue, class type of class, looking at the different classes. And one of the subjects he did was the Gorbals in Glasgow, which was in 1968, which was a very poor part of Glasgow. And there were these tenement blocks that were half lived in, and people lived in great poverty. And this is before they were all knocked down and rebuilt. So those pictures of the Gorbals in 68 were quite strong.
So Claudia, you went back to South Africa in 85 and you lived there until 2011. So
we stayed there for 22 years. So until 2007.
Okay.
So in that time, we started to make films, documentaries, and a couple of dramas, usually about Black life, Black social, cultural, political life.
Yeah.
And that was a time, the time we went there, most people were leaving South Africa. So it was fairly unusual for somebody to want to go to South Africa then, but it was a very interesting time, full of possibilities.
Sorry to interrupt you. What was the reason for you and Jürgen to went back to South Africa again? Because I mean, he had to leave because of political reason, as you just mentioned. Also, for the second time, it was not a light time, so it was not easy. So, what was the reason why you went back?
Well, he had a sense that things were slightly changing and improving, and he wanted to go back to try and document what's going on and to be there at the beginning. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is he wanted to reclaim some of his photos that he'd left there because he couldn't take much out. It was too dangerous to take anything out of South Africa. So he wanted to reclaim some of his photos from the 50s. So that was important. And then he created an archive of the drum photos for about 2 years, which were all about to be thrown out. So he saved them from being destroyed and made a few books about that period from those pictures, not only his pictures, but other people's pictures. And that he did first, and then the films, and then various projects similar to the 50s type of projects, but now in the 80s and 90s. For example, the treatment of farm workers on South African farms, which is a very big project. He went all over the country taking pictures of farm workers, and I think there is one of them that you've got there just to show an example. So that was a bit, and we also did a film, a book, and an exhibition called Voices from Robben Island, about the history of Robben Island, and interviewed Mandela and other people about their experiences. And that was a co-production with the BBC. And that was an interesting project. We also did six decades of South African jazz, another interesting project.
I have these wonderful jazz pictures where the couple is dancing. They have not their feet on the floor. I have it in my apartment, and I look at it each day and I say, well, this is power. This is, wow, this is really a wonderful picture. This is one of the jazz series, the picture. Yeah. So Claudia, when you think to this time, to your first time and Jürgen's second time in South Africa, do you remember one very special experience with a lot of emotion which you will never forget together with Jürgen during this time?
I think it was pretty memorable going to that New Year's Eve party with all the former Robben Island prisoners because they were so interesting, and that was quite a very special event, I found.
Yeah.
And that for me was very, very important. And also, just on a general level, in a part of Johannesburg, in the cultural park called Newtown, there was a little area where everybody mixed, blacks, whites, everybody. And it was very exciting and fun and vibrant. So it showed us that there were great possibilities that people could really get together of all cultural backgrounds. However, unfortunately, that was short-lived. It didn't last. So we had a bit of a pessimistic view about the future of South Africa when we left. First of all, we were always traveling to Europe to have exhibitions because Jürgen's work was quite popular in Europe. And in South Africa, they weren't terribly interested in cultural things, or they didn't support cultural subjects, or historical subjects. I suppose they thought they had other considerations. So that's why we eventually left, and we left for France for 4 years, actually.
Yeah.
For Normandy.
Yeah, when you think, may I ask you, I mean, you were in contact, I assume, more with black than with white people. Was this accepted from the white friends as well, or was this difficult to combine? Because, I mean, you were in the middle.
Well, we had more black friends than white friends. There were very few white friends. And those that they were doing very valuable work, but it was very difficult for them. It was very difficult for them to do the sort of stories and investigations that they wanted to do because there was so little support.
Yeah.
So yes, it was mostly a black friends, black, Indian, or mixed. You know, they call it coloured in South Africa. So it was a mixture, really, mixture of people. But of course, yes, we were in the minor. We were considered a little bit strange, I suppose.
But nice strangers, very nice strangers. So perhaps we can talk about this icon from from Mandela's return to his cell on Robben Island. This was in '94. So you were on Jürgen's side when he took the picture?
No, what happened was I was in Johannesburg. He had to go to Cape Town to do it. And he had to get on a boat to go to Robben Island with a lot of other press people. It was like a press conference type of thing in the cell. And each photographer had about two minutes to take a photo. Oh, and I remember it was my idea, actually, to go. He wasn't keen. Anyway, I just thought it would be historically very important. And it was, in the end. But he was nearly couldn't get on the boat. We had to have a friend get him on the boat. He nearly didn't take the picture. So it was a bit of luck. He got on the boat to take the picture. And interestingly, out of all the many international photographers, his photo was the most successful. So that was nice.
It's interesting, yeah, that is really nice. But I think it was also important that he met him already before and that he really accompanied Mandela for quite a long time, really. The first time and also the second time. So you went back to Normandy, you went back to Berlin, and then since, I don't know, 13, you are living near Valencia in Spain.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
And when you think about Jürgen's work, what was his most important idea or emotion or enthusiasm of Jürgen being a photographer? What do you think?
Well, I think his focus was on human rights and social justice, and so photography was a tool to communicate with people about the situation, world situation, or the situation, the social situation, to expose various things like racism, social injustice, that type of thing. So I think that was always a very strong focus of his work and his life.
Yeah, absolutely. And my last question for this talk, Claudia, do you know if Jürgen had one picture or one series which he liked most of his work, or to which he had a special emotional relation to?
Well, I suppose it's the iconic Mandela in his cell, which I think he did, had a sort of closeness in a sense. He always said his favorite picture is the last picture he took, whatever it was.
Okay. Also a good answer. It's Jürgen's answer. Okay. Okay. So my dear Claudia, thanks a lot for this wonderful talk. And I hope a lot of people will visit the wonderful exhibition in Madrid. And I will close this talk with a quote from Jürgen. The first part of the quote, I don't know if it's from him, it's well known, but the second part is really what we just talked about. So a photo has the power of 1,000 words. It can be the positive force for a positive change. And in that way, I wish you all the best and hope to see you somewhere on this wonderful planet in connection with Leica. So thanks for joining us and all my best. Bye. Bye-bye, Claudia. Bye.
Well, thank you. Thank you too for this interview. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.